spirit shine in lives that are darkened by worry, doubt, or fear. Strengthen and guide those who are trying to do what is right. Make it plain to them. Make us more mindful of the needs of our fellow men and less absorbed in the selfish concerns, that Christ may approve and bless what we do here this day. We ask these blessings in his name. Amen. Please be seated. Our next item on the agenda is bereavements. We mourn the loss of those in our community between the 19th of November and the 16th of December. As I said, we mourn the loss of Joan Doreen Beeson, David Steve, Richard Orman, Noel Antor, Judith Marie Sutcliffe, Neil John Kensley, and Kenneth James Moy. Councillors, executive team friends, those in the gallery, if I could ask you to please stand for a minute of silence as we pay our respects to the deceased and extend our condolences to the family and friends of the deceased. Thank you. Please be seated. We'll now move on to fourth item of the agenda, which is those present apologies. We have received a request for leave of absence from Councillor Swain, and we also have our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Connor, is absent as well. So I now call on an elected member to move that we accept that request for leave of absence. Thank you, Councillor Luke. And seconded by Councillor Moses. Put that motion all in favour? Against? Put the motion carried. Next item is 5.1, which is the confirmation of previous minutes of the ordinary meeting of Council held on the 18th of November. Call on an elected member to please move that to approve. Thank you. Councillor Campbell has moved and seconded by Councillor Fuller. Councillor Campbell, do you want to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Do I have an elected member who would like to ask a question or speak against the motion? Councillor Fuller, would you like to speak in a second?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'd like to put the motion then, all in favour?
Right.
Against? Okay, the motion carried. Moving on to item number 6, which is declarations of interest. We have 5 declarations currently, so I'll ask councillors and executive team to please consider this as I read. If there are more, I'll call for those to be declared. Firstly, I have 2 myself. First one is in relation to item 11.4, development application. It's a significant non-procurement, but I will leave the chambers. And the reason is the applicant's son is a current employee of a business I own, and the applicant is an ex-employee. The second item is 11.12, which is business partner program round 2, and also significant non-procurement. I'll leave the chambers for determination of that one, as I'm a senior executive at the Gunnedah Action Club that has close ties to one of the applicants, and I feel uncomfortable to stay during a conversation of determination. Next, we have from Councillor Moses, item 11.5, development application, a significant non-procurement, as the applicant is close to the applicant. And I'll ask Councillor Moses, will you stay in the room, in the chambers? No, Mr. Mayor, you will leave in the chambers, thank you. Next, from our Executive Officer of Planning and Environment, Mr. Johns, in relation to 11.5, as well development application, less than significant non-procurement. The Louise is a friend of one of the property owners, and Mr. Johns will be staying in for that conversation. He'll be leaving as well. And item 11.10, which is alcohol prohibited area, less than significant non-pecuniary, and the reason is he's a member of the cricket club that plays in the Gunnedah Cricket Association competition. We'll be staying for that. We'll be letting them in as well. So all five declarations, the members have declared will be leaving the chambers for the discussion, debate, and determination. I'll now call for any further declarations in relation to the ordinary meeting. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My apologies to Ms. Nagy. We could copy and paste Councillor Chappie's second declaration for my first. I've got two. And it's less than significant non-pecuniary, and I'm happy to stay in the chamber. I'll remain, and I'm a member of the Gunnedah Rotary Club. And the second one, on that one, just happy to tick the RC box, I'll stay in there. And the second one is relating to item 17.1, which is the tender T2021-13, irrigation system. That is pecuniary, and therefore I'll leave, and reasons having an ongoing commercial relationship with one of the tenders.
Thank you, Councillor.
With one of the tenders.
Thank you, Councillor. I now call for any further declarations in relation to the ordinary meeting, Councillor. Second call. No further declarations. We'll move forward. Next item on the agenda is community representation, and we do have one in relation to item 11.7. That's Mr. Sean Constable. He's here representing the CMCA. The report is in relation to the Director of Planning and Environmental Services report, DA 2020/072, which is 107 to 19 Chandler Street, Gunnedah. So now I'd like to call on Mr. Constable, if you could come forward. Jeremy, would you mind? Mr. Constable, I could just ask, Councillor Moses will operate the microphone for you. So if you're able to give your presentation, as I've explained, there's a window of 5 minutes where you have an opportunity to talk, and then I'll afford the elected members an opportunity to ask any questions if they need clarification. So thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor and councillors, for the opportunity to talk this afternoon rather rapidly. Who do I indicate with the changing the slides? Thank you. As mentioned, this is in relation to agenda item 11.7, the DA that we currently have with council. Attached to this, you'll see on this slide, is the site plan that we have lodged with that application, showing the infrastructure that we're planning on having on site, which shows a caretaker's concrete pad, a shelter for our happy hour, an internal road, and some non-capping from some water and sewer facilities. My presentation today is in relation to a number of the conditions of consent that have been forwarded to me. So I'd just like to point them out and have a quick chat at the end of it. D6 is about off-street parking, and it mentions there that we provide a parking layout and all parking spaces to be marked. I just wanted to reiterate to councillors, you might remember from our presentation 12 months ago when I was here talking to the councillors about our project, and we had a very informal RV park. It shouldn't be considered as a caravan park because it is for self-contained vehicles only. We allow people to find a place that they like to park depending on the configuration of their vehicle, the length, width, how many, if they've got a tow vehicle, how big it is. So it's difficult to actually identify where those vehicles will be parked because it will depend on how many are in the park at the time, how big those vehicles are that are coming in. So we leave it rather informal. We don't identify, and we haven't identified with any of our 7 parks that we've developed so far. Thank you. And that's an example at our Bundaberg RV park. We've got a converted bus, we've got a couple of motorhomes there, and a tow vehicle. So you can see the configurations can vary considerably, and some like to be in the shade, some like to be in the sun, depending if they have solar panels or generators that they give power from. Thank you. The next one, D7, regarding landscaping, it's requested that we show a detailed landscaping plan and showing the setback, and showing the landscaping plan within the setbacks along each of the fronting of the public roads. If you recall our site plan, it showed landscaping adjacent to residential properties to provide some screening from those properties. We haven't provided planting to streets before, and when I questioned about this condition, it was mentioned that's to soften the view given the amount of hard stand that we have within the park. So that will lead us into the next. And that's an example. That's our most recent RV park, which was developed in Temora. That's a view from the street, one of the streets. We have 2 streets fronting that property as well. You can see in the distance residential properties that border. We have 5 that border share a boundary with that park. That's the extent of our infrastructure, a shelter, internal driveway, and then the rest is just grassed area that people can park on, find a place to park for how many nights it's staying. Thank you. And that's an example of the landscaping that we've done. We've provided magnolias that's 3 months into the project. I'd imagine in a couple of years' time that's going to provide pretty good screen to those properties. The next one, E8, on-site car parking. Provide a minimum of 34 parking for a minimum of 34 vehicles, and all parking spaces that will be marked to ensure compliance. We don't have visitors. Some campers may have a tow vehicle that they bring with them that they pull behind their large RV so that they can set up camp and then travel around town and spend their money. So we don't have parking spaces in our parks for vehicles. Again, the vehicle is parked with that rig. E9, traffic and parking. This is probably the more significant one. That all internal driveways, parking areas, loading bays, and vehicle turning areas have been constructed with a base course of adequate depth, and suit design traffic being hard sealed with either bitumen seal, asphalt, concrete on interlocking pavers. Obviously, we're in a rural zone here in town, and in most parks we're developing them on community land or open space. So we're trying to minimise the amount of impact that we have on that site. The last thing I want to do is create more hard stand areas, because what that then does is create more runoff. Then we have to manage that runoff into council's stormwater systems. So the only hard stand areas we have is the compacted gravel driveway and a couple of pads where the caretaker lives and where the shelter is. So I'm requesting that council review each of these conditions and see if that we can come up with an alternative solution similar to what we've done in every other park. Thank you. And just a note on that is we're going to end up with about 30% of our park impervious hard stand areas, which is something that we're trying to avoid with our eco-friendly RV parks. Thank you. That's an example of the Temora showing the internal compacted gravel driveway. They've had significant rainfall this year, and in those situations we might have water on the site for a couple of days. During those times, vehicles don't park on there. They can park on the gravel driveway if they want, or we close the park if it's significant. That's the Bundaberg compacted gravel driveway, showing access in, parking either side. And that's our latest one, Geeveston, Southern Tasmania, that opened today. Council built an internal access for us, that compacted gravel driveway there. We're just putting the fencing now, but you can see that is park. It's an open grassland. We manage that as a parkland. People find a place to park and set up. And one that I forgot, and I was driving up here today, I had 4 hours to think about on the way up, and then I remember talking away about G3, which is prior to occupation certificate that will be requested to consolidate the lots. We're just leasing the property, and it says here that the reason for that is to ensure compliance. I'm not sure what the compliance issue is. It's 4 lots. We're one tenant. We're operating across the 4 lots. We don't need easements to travel across the lot boundaries. It just seems another costing position. I can understand why council might want that. When I was working for council, you try and get someone else to do the work and the cost for you if you can, especially in consolidating lots. But it just seems another costing position to our development. The outcome, if these conditions are imposed as they're written at the moment, I can guarantee the project won't proceed. That's not a threat, it's just a response to what I've seen in a few other projects we've had this year. We had one in northern Tasmania, in Georgetown, where council approved development for an RV park there. And they had similar conditions with hard stand areas for each parking area. We physically couldn't afford to do that, so we walked away from the project. We had one in, the one in Geeston, the project fell down because we got the conditions of consent, which included a significant amount of internal driveways, hard stand areas. Once we got all the quotes, our board decided that they couldn't afford that project. So we said to council, we'd have to walk away from it. They wanted the project, so they came back and said, okay, they'll do the roadworks on our behalf. So they got our budget back to something where the board would approve it and move ahead. Now we have it open. That took an extra 12 months. And the issue I see here, if we approve, or if you approve the conditions as they are, it's going to mean, or I've had to do on a few other projects, then we have to go back and try and massage those conditions to get some variations, which then takes time back to council again to request changes to those conditions. And we can be here in 12 months' time and still talking about the project that we'd have liked to have open about this time when we were talking about it last year. Thank you. How do I go?
Very close. Well done. Okay, councillors, I'll now give you an opportunity to ask questions. But before I do, I'll just remind you, councillors, according to the code, that the questions of the speaker must be done through the chair. They must be direct, they must be succinct and without argument. So now I'll open up for a member who may have a question they'd like to ask of Mr. Constable.
I have one, Chairman. You've indicated that it's comfortable that the conditions remain as they are, that you won't proceed. If the conditions are altered such that they don't cause you to decline, proceed, how long will it be before you anticipate that the park will be developed, given the fact that you've been taking 12 months to get to this point?
Mr. Chair, I'd suggest once we have, if we have development consent, it takes us about a month to get quotes together from local contractors and then getting them coordinated, probably, and then working 3 to 4 months from there. So we're probably looking 5 to 6 months from here.
Are there any further questions, councillors? Councillor Cook.
Well, thank you for your presentation. Welcome to Gunnedah. Great to have you here. I do have one little question. It mentioned state presentation, it's certainly been my understanding throughout this process that it's an RV park, it's sort of RVs, not caravans. Did you notice in a few photos there seem to be caravans in the park? Is that what's the...
Wasn't intentional, it just happens to be most of our caretakers are caravan owners now. They're 25% of our membership and a growing membership. RVs, caravans are included as a recreational vehicle, so we just call them RVs. Caravans are included in that. So at the moment, this approval is for a camping ground, which excludes caravans, which is why we're going through the other process. Continuing with this is the getting the caravan park included as a municipal use on this block of land. For some crazy reason, planning distinguishes caravans as separate from all other recreational vehicles.
Right, supplementary if I can, Mr. Mayor. So to remove all doubt, your membership can be in any form of recreational vehicle, so caravans, self-contained buses, trucks, whatever. Therefore, it's an open slab multi-use park. It's not as you mentioned at the start of your presentation, it's not exclusively for self-contained vehicles. You actually, you may have tied your tongue, but you did say it excludes caravans, it's only self-contained vehicles.
Doesn't exclude caravans, it excludes anything that's not self-contained.
Any further questions, Councillor?
Just one other, Mr. Chairman. The occupancy rate of the, given the fact that the number of your parks are relatively new, but what sort of occupancy rate are you seeing at the moment in some of the parks, sort of numbers?
Through you, Mr. Chair, where initially we thought 50% would be a great number to be hitting. Now that'd be an ecstatic number to be hitting. If we've got a park here to say that we can handle 35, if we're getting 10 a night as an average number, we'd be pretty happy with that. Experience with new parks is probably 3 per night as an average across the year. Our intention is to build up a network with touring routes, so then people can plan their trips with these parks. We just have them 2 scattered apart at the moment. We've got 1 in New South Wales, 1 in South Australia, 5 in Queensland, so it's not much of a touring route. We've got a lot of country between each park.
Councillor Hall?
Just on that, if we got the green light on this, would it be possible that we could get another rally again in the future like we've been in the past?
Through Mr. Chair, that's a good question because we're heading to Manila again next year. We went there 12 years ago or so. So there's nothing to say that the town can't have a rally again, especially if the rally goes well, like the one here in Gunnedah.
Any further questions, councillors? Well, thank you, Mr. Councillor. We appreciate your time and effort to come all the way to Gunnedah to share your concerns. Thank you. Thank you. Councillors will now move on. Item number 8, which is Merrill Minute. There are no Merrill Minutes to our ordinary meeting. So next on our agenda is the General Manager's report, starting at item 9.1. In fact, it's the only report from the General Manager. Before I pass to the General Manager, I may just ask for councillors to put a red and see that there is an opportunity to nominate a councillor or councillors to attend the New South Wales Australian Local Government Women's Association Annual Conference. I might just talk for nominations for that first before we go further.
I'll nominate Councillor Fuller, Councillor Luke.
Councillor Fuller, do you accept the nomination?
Yes.
Councillor Luke, do you accept the nomination?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
I'll now call for any further nominations. There are no further nominations. Congratulations, both councillors. So I'll now hand over to our General Manager to detail the recommendation before you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that pretty much covers what the purpose of the report is, so please to take any questions.
I'll now call for elected member to move the recommendation to become a motion. Thank you, Councillor Moses, and seconded by Councillor Hawke. Councillor Moses, do you wish to speak on the motion as the mover?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'll now call for elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion. Councillor Hawke is the second of the motion. Do you wish to speak?
Only to congratulate the officer on such a short presentation.
If the case, then I'll put the motion on the card. Against? Declare that motion carried. Thank you for your contribution, Mr. Groth. We'll now move on to item number 10, which is the Director of Corporate and Community Services reports. And we have a few. And the first one is item 10.1, 2019-20 annual report. I'll hand over to Mr. Foreman to detail the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Something tells me I won't be getting the short presentation more this time, but it gives me some pleasure to present the 2019-2020 annual report. And in doing so, I'd like to acknowledge the staff who put a lot of effort every year in producing this document, and in particular Ms. Markey, who pulls information from all corners of the organisation and puts it together in quite a hefty document every year and does it in such a way that makes it look easy. And the recommendation is that the report be received and noted.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. I'll now like to call on elected member to move the recommendation as motion. Thank you, Councillor Luke, and seconded by Councillor Hawke. Councillor Luke, would you like to speak to the motion as the mover?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have actually sort of read through all these long documents. I'm actually just wondering whether it's appropriate to the wording of point number 1, which is that the following revised policies be adopted. Because E and F haven't been revised, the grammar
Councillor
may
Luke, sorry, Councillor Luke, if I could just draw your attention to item 10.1 is the one we're debating, which is the annual report.
Well, let's leave that other thing be. Sorry, I didn't fit the page. No, I've got no comments.
Thank you. I now call for elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question. Councillor Hooker is the seconder to the motion. You wish to speak?
Only to say it's a great document. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Just before I put this motion, councillors, with your indulgence, I'd just like to say a couple of small words in relation to the annual report. I found it very encouraging reading. So a couple of highlights that stand out to me that I'd certainly like to speak on briefly is the Community Resilience Program, $3.4 million. We've spoken about that on numerous occasions, but not only did we see the difference it made, it was hard decisions in this chambers to make those decisions, but we saw the benefit in our community, and we're seeing that in population and also unemployment numbers. And then to win the award in local government category for resilience program, I think was very significant. The major projects valued at $125 million. That's without that $53 million commitment from the state government for the upgrade of the hospital. The value of the DAs and CCs, if you can compare the number for 1920 versus last year, that's up 50%. In the COVID year, on the back of 3 years of drought, significant results, I think. Also, the co-investment, our $6.3 million that we put down as co-funding for funding of applications we put forward to state and Commonwealth governments, we turned that into $47 million, so a return of almost 650% on that community money. What a significant outcome that was on behalf of our community. Our financial performance indicators well above those that are set by local government as benchmarks, again, which we consistently see each year. So well done to our organisation for that management. And the fact that we end the financial year once again in a very sound financial position is something that I think we should all be proud of as elected members, but also the entire organisation. And thank you to Eric and your team for what was an absolutely outstanding result, in my view, based on the hurdles and the issues the community are going through at this point. So thank you for your indulgence in saying that now. I'd like to put the motion on favour. Against? So that motion carried. Moving on to item 10.2, code of council meeting in villages, and I'll hand back to Mr. Foreman to detail his recommendation for it.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a separate report deals with council's practice of holding a meeting in the villages. Traditionally, we hold 2 meetings in the villages each year, and due to COVID-19 this year, that was impacted, and the meeting in Breeza couldn't go ahead. Next year being an election year and that being a little bit difficult, the recommendation is that council seek to hold 1 meeting in the villages next year in Breeza at a mutually agreed date. At this stage, that date is shaping up to be March, although that will be confirmed with a report to council in February for the ongoing meeting schedule for the year. The recommendation is as put on the screen.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. I call on elected member. Thank you, Councillor Foote, and seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Foote, do you wish to speak to the motion as a mover?
No, thanks, Mr Mayor.
No elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question. Councillor Moses, seconded the motion. You wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
There you go. So put the motion on in favour. Against? Agree that motion carried. Mr. Foreman, I'll hand back to you to detail your recommendation on item 10.3, policy development framework and policy review.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report deals with the ongoing review of council's policy documents. The recommendation is that the following policies be adopted, the following revised policies be adopted, that being the policy development framework, which is council's policy on policies, the procurement and tendering policy, local preference policy, grazing of stock, and competitive neutrality complaints, as well as managing unreasonable complainant conduct. The councillors will note that the procurement and tendering policy and the local preference policy both give reference to the change in legislation of the tender threshold, so tendering threshold for local government has moved from 150,000 to 250. And other than that, most of the other revisions in those documents, as shown in the highlight, are legislative updates and other minor updates. The second part of that recommendation, there is an attachment to the business paper that contains a list of policies, and that is that those policies identified as no longer required to be formally retired.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. I've got an elected member to move the recommendation become a motion. Councillor Hook and seconded by Councillor Campbell. Councillor Hook, would you like to speak to the motion as the mover?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I've elected member who'd like to speak against the motion, ask a question.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
No, go for it.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like the officer perhaps to, having read most of these documents, I still couldn't quite really work out what the criteria was for when policies are determined to be redundant. I would have thought for 2009 resources development policy might have been one of those that could have been reviewed or made redundant, particularly given the last discussion we had at the last meeting. But and the fact that that was rather interesting that particular policy is not on our website. Can you tell me how many policies are not on the website which are apparently current, and why policies which are current aren't on the website, so that both councillors and our community members are able to identify those policies and read them?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I might start with addressing the second part of the question. I have become aware that the policies on our website only include policies that have been adopted post 2012. I'm not sure at this stage why that was done. It would be I'll be guessing as to the reason, but you're correct in saying that our website should contain all of council's adopted policies, and it's my intention following this meeting in the new year to include those policies that on the website that aren't there, some of the old ones. I guess the reason that hasn't happened in the last couple of weeks is because I knew this this report was coming to council and there will be potentially a shift in our policies and wanted to do it once and get it up to date. So that would happen in the new year. As for determining whether policy is no longer required, there'd be a number of reasons why that would happen. It would be primarily policy documents and council documents, so council determined are no longer required. If legislation changes is another key reason why we no longer need one. And also, as is the case with a number of those policies in the table there, we tend to get more comprehensive policies. So where one policy may include information that was previously in other ones, I think that's the case for a couple of the policies on our register where we have more contemporary policies that make the old ones obsolete. But yeah, there's probably there's no set trigger. There's a number of reasons why a policy would be considered no longer required.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. Councillor Campbell is a second to the motion. You wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I now call for any councillors who would like to. Councillor Luke, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I was trying to utter before, when I got my motion, my items muddled up, the fact that the first four of those policies have been revised, yet policy E and F have been reviewed and not been revised, makes me uncomfortable with that motion. And I wonder whether the mover and the seconder would be happy to have a middle point so that after D, it is that the following, and that the following two policies have been reviewed and adopted unchanged, and then go on with the rest of it. If it's not revised, then we shouldn't have it all under the one banner, minus the magic point, but if it's not changed, it's not changed.
Councillor Luke, you'll see Ms. Markey's comments or suggested wording in item 3 of your suggestion. Can you just clarify? Clarify wording before I ask to move in a second to their concurrence.
May I please, Ms. Markey, that the following two policies be noted as having been reviewed.
Mr. Foreman, I would just ask for your advice that those words would be adequate for those two particular policies to still be adopted.
Councillor Luke's correct, those two documents were reviewed, but they weren't revised, they were already sufficient, so there's no issue with the change in wording, but I would add that the following policies be noted as having been reviewed and now adopted.
Councillor Luke, do you accept
I do.
advice?
Someone was the mover and second was due.
So now I'll ask the mover in Councillor Hook, are you happy with this suggestion?
What about item 1, E and F, they should be taken out of there, shouldn't they? Item 1, E and F.
It's all rewritten again if you move down. the
So
slide.
it would be now 1,
Oh,
2
okay.
and 3, so
Okay.
1 and 2 were the original,
Yeah.
what you moved as the motion, so effectively they would be gone and it would be a new 1, 2 and 3 as written.
I'm happy with that.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell's the second on the motion. Are you happy to accept?
I think it'd be a hell of a lot easier if we just put in item 1 that the following revised and or reviewed policies be adopted.
That would be just as fine.
Mr. Foreman, I'll refer that for your advice.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, either one would suffice.
Councillor Hook, you're happy as the mover of the motion,
Let's go with the simpler of the two.
which would be, Marty, can I ask you to remove 1, 2, 3? Thank you. I'm going to ask again, Councillor Hook, as the mover of the motion, as the wording you see on screen. In 2 points, 1 and 2, are you happy with that?
I'm happy with that.
Councillor Campbell has seconded to the motion. Are you content?
Yes, thank you.
So this now is the motion. We've had 2 for, 2 against. Councillors, I'm going to put the motion on vote. Against? Got the motion carried. Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Foreman. Do I detail your recommendation on 10.4 mode of, model code of living practice?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. These reports that notify council of some changes that have been made recently with regard to council's code of meeting practice. It's now a requirement for councils to keep a recording of the ordinary meetings of council and committee meetings on the website for 12 months. Previously, our policy had a shorter time frame than that. So the recommendation is that the updated code of meeting practice be adopted, which incorporates that change to 12 months.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. I'll elected member to move the recommendation to become a motion. If Councillor Fuller, seconded by Councillor Fuller. Councillor Fuller, do you wish to speak as a member of the motion?
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Right, elected member, you'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Luke is the second of the motion, just to speak.
No, thanks,
If
Mr.
the
Mayor.
case, put the motion on vote. Against? The motion carried. Hand back to you, Mr. Foreman. Detail of recommendation item 10.5, policy IT acceptable use.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation is that the IT acceptable usage policy be adopted.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. I now call an elected member to move the recommendation to become a motion. Thank you, Councillor Luke. Seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Luke, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thanks, Mr.
I
Mayor.
have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion.
I'd like to ask a question for you, Chairman. I found this is a very long and tedious document, Mr. Foreman. My question is, who's going to read? It's a policy, what's the purpose of it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Haslett, for your question. It is a fairly long document, and I guess point I made in the report about the importance of IT security and IT systems to corporations is key. No matter how good a IT system you have, and no matter how strong your technology security controls are, the weakest link in any IT system is between the chair and the keyboard, the people operating. The many hacks and exploits that occur now are not technology breaks, it's not hackers that find their way through technology systems, it's hackers that manipulate people. So this policy is necessarily wrong and necessarily covers off on a whole range of technology concerns or mistakes that people can use by misusing IT equipment. And it won't be simply a document that gets waved in front of people, particularly for staff. Staff that start with counsel on their induction, provided training to explain the content of that document. And they also undergo IT security awareness training, which links to that document. And generally what we will do with counsellors when they start in a new term is do a similar IT induction process as well to train people about their obligations as far as IT security is concerned. It's a very important control document in our IT security framework.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. Now call on Councillor Moses as the second of the motion. You wish to speak to the motion.
No, thank you, Mayor.
Allow a further question or councillor to speak against the motion if there is one. If the case, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? The motion carried. Move on to item 10.6, policies, media and communication engagement. I'll hand back to Mr. Foreman to deal with the recommendation in two parts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report presents two policies, the media policy, which covers council's engagement with the media, traditional and social media, as well as the revised community engagement policy. The changes to the revised community engagement policy have been as a result of some recommendations made by council's internal auditor, and those have been put forward in the report.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. I now call on elected member.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move something slightly different to the recommendation, if I could, please. And for the ease of Ms. Markey, we can workshop this together, and for all of my fellow councillors who follow on. Point 1 would now read that the revised media policy be adopted with the following changes, and point 2 would remain identical to what it was. And then I was going to then direct everyone's attention to page 100 of our business paper, which off the top of my head I can't remember what page number of the actual media engagement policy that is, but I'll tell you when I scroll to page 100 in a second.
Page 1, not.
It's page 100 on my business paper, which is page 4 of the media policy. And the two changes is that, how do we want to do this? Is that there's a paragraph that starts with following approval from the General Manager or with the General Manager's authority, the relevant director or council employees may make media statements in their area of expertise, however, must do so in consultation with the council's media and communications team. But for the interests of humour and correctness, I think that should be council's communications team. The slightly more serious point is in the bottom of the page, just before section 5.3, so in section 5.2 still, there's a list of dot points. In doing so, council is to ensure so on and so forth. And I'm seeking to delete the 5th dot point, which reads, councillors are required to advise the media and communications team of any media approaches / statements.
Chairman, I'm happy to second that. I was going to move the same deletion.
So now I've got a seconder in there, which is I'm happy to.
Before I allow you to speak to the council, I guess we do need to get the wording correctly on the screen of the motion that's been Already moved and seconded without the wording, and I'm not comfortable with that. Let's get the wording right first.
I'm comfortable that Ms Markey has adequately made notes of my intended changes and provided the relevant directories I'll be happy.
After approaches, it should be slash statements.
Yes.
Just
Thank you, Rick. Councillor Hasler is the second of the motion. The wording on the scene. So it's moved by Councillor O'Keefe, seconded by Councillor Hasler. In my 4.5 years here, I don't think I've seen that before. So I'll now hand to you, Councillor O'Keefe, if you would like to speak to the motion.
Well, firstly, I can review my notes because I know it's happened in that order or the opposite order previously too. Secondly, obviously the change to the communications team I think speaks for itself, as much as I was keen to learn about our new department and you know, my desire to delete the paragraph. I understand the intent, but I don't actually think it's practically achievable. You know, I suggest there are possibly many of us in this chamber who have, because I do understand that exact wording exists in our current policy. I'd suggest there are many of us in the chamber who have inadvertently or accidentally breached that currently existing dot point previously, and I don't believe it's reasonable to expect elected members to, even if acting in all good faith, actually keep on top of that, particularly if we're covering traditional and social media. Requests for comments sometimes come thick and fast, probably more so to other elected members who are more interesting than me. However, I understand, I think I understand the intent of the point. It's covered elsewhere. I think, you know, again, I see the support of my fellow elected members to go. Really, I don't think we can uphold that. That doesn't show integrity if I made to support something that I don't think myself I can actually uphold.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll now call for elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question. Councillor Hasler is the second of the motion. Use the speak.
Yes, I think it's a very important point to be made here. If councillors are speaking on behalf of the council when they've been asked to do so, you would normally expect a communication or perhaps talking to the media team. If I'm approached by any member of the media and I want to make a statement as a councillor, not speaking on behalf of the council, or posing that I'm speaking on behalf of the council, I'll say anything I like to provide this factual, which I always do, of course. And we're not going to be reporting to a communications team, I'm sorry. They're there doing their job, but I'm doing my job by making my view heard as an elected person representing the community or sections of the community. And so to suggest that I have to report any approaches or I have to report at any time that I speak, I'm sorry, it won't happen. So we don't need it in there.
Councillors, we've had no councillors speak against the motion, so I'm now going to put the motion. All in favour? Against? The motion carried. Moving on to item number 10.7, which is a cultural precinct master plan. I'll hand back to Mr. Foreman to detail the recommendation in two parts before you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The cultural precinct master plan is presented following the submission of a number of community members and adjustments that have been made to the plan following our exhibition period. The recommendation is that the cultural precinct master plan be adopted, inclusive of the changes that have been made since the submission period. In the second part of that recommendation calls for the allocation of a budget for council to undertake a capital expenditure review of the project, and that is required by the Office of Local Government for any council projects in excess of $10 million, which this project will be. And it will cover a range of considerations as outlined in the report. And it's recommended that the capital expenditure review be done as the next step before any further expenditure on the project.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. I'll call an elected member who'd like to move the recommendation to become a motion. If you Councillor O'Keefe, seconded by Councillor Fuller. Councillor O'Keefe, you wish to speak to the motion as mover?
Very happy to, Mr Mayor. This is another master plan to use some alliteration. But no, this is another major piece of work that the organisation, has led and guided a large section of our community and a broadly represented section of our community through delivering. And it's a pleasure to be part of the council and sitting here today, able to support and improve something that's been a long journey and it needed to be so, and we've got a good result. And it'll be a pleasure to assist, advocate for the community to present this plan and vision forward and seek funding to deliver the project.
I'm happy to second that, Mr Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe spoke and it's been seconded by Councillor Fuller for the motion. I'll now call for an elected member who would like to speak.
You can speak forward and close.
I'd now like to call on an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question. Councillor Fuller, as the second of the motion, you wish to speak.
Mr Mayor, as part of that committee, I'm very pleased to see this go ahead. With a lot of work going in, a lot of hours by all the community members on that committee as well. And I think it's a great investment if we can get the funding to get it going. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. And once again, I'll ask for your indulgence if I can just say a few words on this particular item, councillors. I too would like to congratulate all members of the working group, those elected members that are on there, but community members. It certainly has been a lot of consultation over a long period of time to get to the point, the exciting point in my view of where we are tonight as we're endorsing the cultural precinct master plan. Also, I think we should recognise Lee Hillam and Dunn Hillam architects for their vision and commitment to this project too, because it was quite a difficult one. It wasn't that simple. The design, in my opinion, will pay respect to the heritage of the town hall, and it will add excitement to our main street, and it will also change the way that our community will meet and interact into the future, and that is exciting for our community. But the next steps, as both Councillor O'Keefe and Fuller mentioned, will be challenging. Getting the project ready for construction and attracting the type of finances, more than $13.5 million, won't be simple, and it will take drive and determination from this whole organisation. So I certainly will be supporting this motion I'm about to put, but with that complete understanding that there is a big challenge ahead of us to actually deliver on this master plan. In saying that, I now like to put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Unanimously supported. I'll now hand back to Mr. Foreman to detail his recommendation in item 10.8, the civic budget.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As this report deals with some changes to the movie schedule of the civic, that recommendations I've put forward to the council on the back of some vastly reduced attendance since reopening due to COVID-19. We're currently seeing about a 47% reduction in our numbers through the civic, and it's a situation I hope improves in the new year, and council staff will do everything we can to promote and to try and entice more people back to the movies, but people are somewhat reluctant at the moment to attend the cinema. The recommendation at this stage is we take some early action to reduce the budget impact, which is to reduce the number of screening days taking off the Wednesday, and then review the situation following February, in the hope that we do see the numbers pick up over the Christmas break and the new year.
I'm happy to move my recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman and Councillor Hasler, and seconded by Councillor Fuller. Councillor Hasler is the mover of the motion.
I think it's unfortunate that just after we've completely renovated the theatre that we have to make this action, but looking at the three alternatives put before us, I think it's prudent, particularly financially at the moment, but also reflecting, as Mr. Foreman said, the effects of COVID. I know personally I haven't been going as often as I would normally do. I think people have found alternatives to review, etc. So whether it turns around, it's going to be interesting over the next 6 months. So certainly I hope that the usage gets and patronage gets back to what it was pre-COVID. At that time, we'll find out at least that we will be operating a couple of days a week, and that will still give people an opportunity to have a social outing and a big screen effect.
Thank you, Councillor Hazlitt. Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Fuller has seconded the motion. Wish to speak.
No, thanks, Mr.
Being the
Mayor.
case, then I'll put the motion on the table. Against? The motion carried. Moving on, item 10.9, GoCo Clinical Governance Framework. And I'll hand back to Mr. Foreman to detail the recommendation. It's in 3 parts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report recommends the establishment of a clinical governance committee for council. And it also recommends that the council call for expressions of interest for professional people to sit on that committee and provide advice to council. And that the council delegate authority to that committee in order for it to discharge its duties.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. Elected members, I have a recommendation before you. I now call for a move of that.
I'm happy to do that way, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hasler, and seconded by Councillor Luke. Councillor Hasler, do you wish to speak as a move the motion?
Well, unfortunately, I missed the presentation today, but I have had a long association with GoCo since it was established 30 odd years ago, and it's had a number of remakes and been very successful in continuing to serve not only this particular local government area, but our neighbours. And I think it's pretty obvious that this has to take place, so happy to support.
Thank you, Councillor Hasler. Do I have an elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion? Councillor Luke has seconded the motion. Mr. Speaker.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think this is a very, awkward area, aged care. There's issues throughout the country, and probably not only in our country, but others as well too. Very important with the governance, and I'm impressed and thankful that we actually have a team that is looking after the governance and the running of GoCo, as well as the consequences to our council and the elected members. So well done to that team.
Thank you, Councillor Luke. Before I put this motion, I'd also like to acknowledge the manager of GoCo, who's been a great servant of our community in that organisation, Bruce Mercer, who's with us today in the gallery, for your ongoing high quality of management of what is a really tough organisation and industry to be in. So thank you for your contribution on behalf of our community. Councillors, in saying that now, I'd like to put the motion on the table. Against? Declare that motion carried. And the last report from Mr. Foreman is 10.10, outstanding resolution register. And I'll hand back into detail for the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The outstanding resolution register is presented for the information of councillors, and the recommendation is that the information be received and noted.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. I now call an elected member to move that recommendation become a motion. Thank you, Councillor Hook, seconded by Councillor Luke. Councillor Hook, do you wish to speak to the motion as the mover?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I have elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion. Councillor Luke, Councillor Hazlitt, did you have a question? I was going to the second, I wasn't sure.
Sorry, I'm just asking a question. I think I'm on page 127. I think that's one of the questions in relation to the airport. The RFS, shed that's proposed near the airport. That doesn't seem to have gained legs. Do we have any information on that?
I might refer that question to Mr. Butler.
Thank you to Councillor Hazlitt for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. That project is contingent on the RFS developing and lodging a development application and also securing funding for that work. So basically, as an organisation, council's done everything we can in order to continue that project progressing. The ball's now in the court of the RFS.
Councillor Luke is the second of the motion. You wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
In the case of the motion, all in favour? Aye. Against? The motion carried. Thank you, Mr. Foreman, for your 10 reports in our December last meeting of the year. And now moving on to item 11, which is Director of Planning and Environment Services report. I'll call on Mr. Johns to detail his one of 14 reports to the December ordinary meeting, starting at 11.1, which is procurement of infrastructure and services impact model for Bygreen Plan.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you, councillors, as you would have read in this report, it relates to seeking retrospective endorsement of decision made by the general manager to procure an infrastructure and services model, which is specifically focused on the Narrabri Underground Stage 3 extension project. That is on currently on exhibition. It closes today. My team has prepared a submission. In relation to that, the model has assisted us in preparation of that submission and would also serve to provide us with some critical data to inform PK discussions.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. I'll call for a move. Thank you, Councillor Haslett has moved that motion and seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Haslett, do you wish to speak to the motion?
It's fairly obvious that we need to get this information as quickly as possible, and from a brief report we had today, it would seem that it's been very useful, and I look forward to getting a result.
Thank you. Do I elect a member who'd like to ask a question or speak against that motion? Councillor Moses is the second. If you wish to speak.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Be the case for the motion, all in favour? Against? The motion carried. Moving on to item 10.2, 11.2, which is a draft memo unlimited policy managing contaminated or potentially contaminated land.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you, this report relates to the endorsement of placing a public exhibition of the the draft Namoi Limited Managing Contaminated or Potentially Contaminated Land Policy 2019. This policy, as you would have read in the report, councillors, essentially provides us an opportunity to provide a uniform approach to how we deal with contaminated land and also potentially contaminated land. As I said, a uniform approach across the 5 LGAs. It does have implications for us in how we deal with planning certificates or 10.7 certificates, and also has implications for us in terms of how we assess DAs.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. I'll elect the member to move that recommendation. I'll give that motion. Thank you to Councillor Haslett, seconded by Councillor Hawke.
I do have a question for you, Mr. Chairman.
Over to you, Councillor Haslett.
The financial implications, I know for the first 3 years are funded, but the statement there is that following that period, the program will require resourcing by the use of staff and or a consultant. Do we have any sort of estimate on what sort of amount that would be?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Haslett, through you, Mr. Mayor. This stage is difficult to say. My anticipation is that through this process, we're actually skilling up our own staff. So I don't anticipate we would need to engage external consultants unless it's a particularly complex contaminated lands issue. So it is difficult to say that, Councillor Haslett, depending on that's really on a case-by-case basis.
Elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion. Councillor Hawke is the second. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
For the motion, and if that's the case, all in favour? Against? The motion carried. Moving on to item 11.3, which is Gunnedah Waste Management Southern Offset Stormwater Catchment Assessment. I'll hand back to Mr. Johnson to detail that recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. As the report outlines, very simply, it's seeking an allocation of $35,000 in domestic waste management restricted asset. That is for the purposes of completing southern off-site stormwater catchment assessment. There's information in the report essentially to ensure that we meet our licensing requirements for the environmental planning, the Environment Protection Authority. We need to ensure that clean water that enters the site is able to travel through the site and leave the site without coming into contact with leachate.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. Hands everywhere. Moved by Councillor Campbell, seconded by Councillor Luke. Councillor Campbell, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Mr. Johns has covered it pretty well.
Elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion. Councillor Luke is the second. Do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think rubbish, which used to be such a simple thing in our day, is now such a complex thing. And reading through some of the reports and what has to happen with water on, off, it's just huge. And I think that the team, especially with the manager in Sheridan, is doing a fantastic job. And I think that that's another area that makes me more comfortable as a councillor, having these sorts of things tended to in such a timely fashion. So well done to the team.
Thank you, Councillor Luke. I now like to put the motion on the vote. Against? Declare the motion carried. Councillors, the next item, 11.4, I have a declaration of interest, so I'll now be leaving the chambers for that discussion, debate and determination. And Councillor will take the chair.
Regular Treasurer of the Mayor has left chambers. Councillors, we're now to item 11.4, development application 2020/026, conversion of a park farm building into a dwelling house to Vernon Street, Carroll. I hand over to Mr. Johns to outline his recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. For you, this report relates to the DA, as indicated, for the park conversion of a farm building to a dwelling house at Carroll. The DA seeks a number of departures from Council's development control plan. First one being building setback from primary road frontage. Second one being a request to depart from a development standard under clause 4.2a of the LEP. That essentially relates to development standards required for the erection of a dwelling. The latter development standard variation also required the concurrence of the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. This concurrence has been granted, as you would have read in the report. It's also important to note that subject dwelling replaced an existing dwelling, hence that the departure to the development standard was a simpler process for the applicant. And the other point to note is that it's actually seeking consent retrospectively. The work had already been done. In the circumstances of this particular case, the departures to standards are supported.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. I have Councillor Fuller, the second for the motion. Thank you, Councillor Hasler. Councillor Fuller.
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor. It's all self-explanatory. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Councillor Hasler, you wish to speak? Does there anybody wish to speak against the motion? That's right. Put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Yes, the motion is carried. Would someone like to call the Mayor back into chambers? Ms. Markey, to show that the Mayor has returned to chambers.
Councillors, the next item on our agenda, we have two declarations of interest laid out by Councillor Moses and Executive Director Mr. Johns. I now like to call Wade Hudson from the Planning Department to come forward to detail the recommendation in 11.5, which is development application 2020.090. I'll hand over to Wade.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor, this DA seeks consent from Council for additions and alterations to the existing dwelling at Evergrove Lane, Gunnedah. The application is seeking a variation to the DCP relating to the setbacks of the dwelling from an unsealed road. This departure is supported for the, in the circumstances of the development.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. I'll now call for elected member to move the recommendation.
I move that one.
Thank you, Councillor Hasler, and seconded by Councillor Hasler. Do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, I don't.
I would like to member if I could ask the question or speak against the motion. Councillor Hawkins, the second of the motion, you wish to speak.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillors, being a planning matter, by show of hands, I now call for all of those in favour of the recommendation. Call that unanimously supported by all of the elected members in the room. And declare that motion carried. Thank you, Mr. Hudson. We'll now call on Mr. Johns and Councillor Moses to enter the chamber, and please, Ms. Mark, get the record. That we have both entered the chamber, so we'll now move on to the next item, which is 11.6. And that item is also application modified building approval 222/95 .002, and I'll hand to Mr. Johns to detail the recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And through you, this report, councillor seeks approval of a proposed modification of a 1995 building application, which was in legislation prior to 99, and it's for a dwelling at 921 Glencoe Road, Emerald Hill. Again, this DA seeks support for a departure from the setback of a dwelling from an unsealed road. The applicant also seeks to make some, or to regularise, some minor changes to original plans, in that the original dwelling was located on a slightly different, the plan showed the dwelling in a different location, and it was also an additional bedroom. And the applicant is now seeking to ensure that that's now compliant on the approved plans from council.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. Will an elected member move the recommendation become a motion?
I'm happy enough to do it, but I have a question.
Firstly, I'll get a second to Councillor Hasler before I go to debate, seconded by Councillor Campbell. Councillor Hasler.
Question relates to how can that take place? I thought we had a building who have been checked to see compliance. They've actually built in the wrong location, to my understanding. Is there any checking stuff that process, or is it pre?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for the question, Councillor Hasler. Might have to defer to my learned colleague in Blake O'Malley, who's been in the game a few years longer than me. My understanding is that an occupation certificate, in theory, should have been applied for back when the house was built in 95 and 96. But they didn't apply for that, and they've never been issued.
Thank you. Now, call for elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion. Councillor Campbell is the second of the motion. Mr. Speaker.
No, Mr. Mayor.
In the case, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declare the motion carried. Moving on to the next item, which is 11. It was unanimously. Next item is 11.7, development application 2020/072. And I'll hand to Mr. Johns to detail the recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you, councillors, this report seeks consent of an RV park or a recreational vehicle park on council-owned land at 107 109 Chandler Street in Gunnedah. Conditions are recommended to mitigate potential impact of the use of the land. Conditions of note that you would have read in the conditions, councillors, include the need to hard seal or to provide some other alternate council-approved treatment to minimise impacts of dust. Obviously, there are a number of residential dwellings fairly close to this development, and these are some of the issues raised in submissions from adjoining owners or nearby owners. There's also a requirement in there for landscaping, and that's to essentially to minimise impacts of privacy from residential dwellings, and also to ensure that there are no amenity issues in relation to cars passing by on the road, and also the privacy of occupants of the RV park. And there's also been a condition imposed requiring the lodgement of the Section 68 application under the Local Government Act, and essentially that's to ensure that the development, once it's built, is in compliance with local government caravan parks, camping grounds, and movable dwelling regulation 95, which may require the provision of some amenities on that site for the use of clients, I guess.
Just if I could, just before I ask for a move of the recommendation, can I just ask one clarification? When you say amenities, you mean showers, toilets, or washing facilities, or what do you mean?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thanks for the question. Essentially, the regulation that I referred to is, as I said, 1995. It's an old regulation, and it's absolutely in every circumstance for a camping ground they would be required to normally provide a very prescriptive brick toilet that actually defines a brick toilet. We've had some discussions with the Office of Local Government and also the Department of Planning. That actual regulation now resides with the Department of Planning, and in certain circumstances we could, the proponent could seek a departure for this particular case. They haven't done that at this stage, but to me, if the development is exclusively for the use of self-contained vehicles, there is no need for a toilet or shower or any of those things, by virtue of the fact that it's a very prescriptive condition of use inside.
Mr Chairman, I move that the council adopt the recommendation with the deletion of proposed conditions D6, D7, D8, D9 and G3.
Now, before I call for a second, we'll just get those clarified for all of the elected members, what will be taken out under your motion, councillor. Okay, thank you, Ms. Markey. I'll now call for a seconder to that. Councillor Hook has seconded that motion. And Councillor Hayes, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr Chairman, I do so for a number of reasons, and one of them, I guess, is that I've had a sort of experience in travelling around with some of my other colleagues in terms of caravan parks, etc. And one of the things I've learned is that there, and of course Mr Constable gave a very detailed enunciation of the proposed project 12 months ago and raised some of those issues as he did today. But first of all, we don't need D6, we don't want or need to prescribe parking areas in these parks. That's the very nature of them. They're set up so that people choose their own spot. It doesn't need a concrete pad or a bitumen pad. They're fairly self-contained vehicles. Many of the people would prefer to be on grass than on concrete, and which raises the heat, etc. Of the facility. If you've got 30% concrete and or bitumen, you can imagine what that sort of gives off in the heat in the middle of summer. To ensure a suitable parking layout, people don't necessarily want to be regimented into lines. In terms of the second one, the retail landscaping plan, as someone who's probably been to the fore in planting thousands of trees in our neighbourhood, it might come as a surprise you, I might be recommending we don't do this here. I mean, who's going to maintain them, etc. And they're not necessary. They're not necessary. It's a lovely landscape down there. The residents of those or the users of this park probably prefer to look across the Watershed Reserve and Lonely Fields, etc., rather than have their view blocked by trees. In terms of the 8 on-site car parking accommodations for 34 vehicles, that's contrary to the whole intent here. I mean, at least half probably of the vehicles will be motorhomes. Some of them bring a little vehicle, some. And if it moves down the track into the caravan park, should the next recommendation go through in the next item 8, yes, they would have a vehicle which they tow, but once again, they don't need a hard stand. It's not like a commercial site where we want so many parking spaces for people who are coming to those shops, commercial businesses. These are people who are travelling, they want minimal services, and they are a growing number, 80,000 in this organisation. In terms of the traffic and parking, once again, I mentioned the bitumen and concrete concept. I mean, ironically, this site is an RU1, it's an agricultural, it's zoned agricultural. I'm not going to be doing too much agriculture with concrete and bitumen as a site cover. With that, so I mean, it doesn't even suit that definition. I mentioned the heat generation, and I thought we were a council which was trade development, wanted to see businesses encouraged to provide opportunities for our business houses, to have visitors who would be coming and staying in this facility, only a block or two from the commercial centre of the town. we're putting in conditions which will prevent the process going forward. G3, I think it is over the page, the consolidation is of no benefit to the proponent. If we thought it was so necessary, we could have done that ourselves as the owners of the lot some time ago. And we've owned that land for I don't know how long, a couple of decades or more. I think it's just an option, a bit of grab by council to have it all put into one site, one lot. So to me, it's counterproductive, some of those things. If I can just get Miss Markey to put up a couple of photos that I brought, I happen to have the pleasure of staying in the showground car park, Caravan Park at the moment. In fact, that's my caravan at the back of the photo. That's the site where people there's 30 or 40 vehicles can camp on that grassed area at that site. Another photo there with Ms. Mark. Yes, there are a couple of hard stands, I think there's either 10 or 11, but just as many, or if not more, choose to stay on the grass. Since I've been there, almost every night there's been at least half of the sites on the grass taken up and only 3 or 4 on the concrete pads. If we just sit there, here we are again, that's the line down on the fence. The only reason why they have to park, they don't have to park, there's the power along the fence line. I mean, we've already got this in town, and it's not something which would be new. So why are we requiring it when we've already got an example in our own town, and we saw 6 or 7 other communities that have chosen to have one of these parks without those conditions. So I urge the other councillors to support the installation of the park, but with those 5 deletions. I think it's 5. 1, 2, 3, 5 deletions.
Thank you, Councillor Haslam. Now I'll let the member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question.
Mr. Mayor, probably got a number of questions. I'm considering moving a procedural motion to go on committee of the whole and work through them as a group. I think I'm considering I might actually move that if I can get a second.
Will I have a second to the procedural motion? We move to committee of the whole. Ask one more time, or it will lapse. Do I have a second to the procedural motion to move into committee of the whole? There are no seconds.
No dramas, I've asked my questions. I will wait for the interest of me. I guess my first and overarching questions to the relevant director and seeking an opinion on whether the motion is passed with the deletion of the clauses and whether that opens us up to any issues as a council. You know, are we actually passing a lawful motion if we do so?
Thanks, Councillor O'Keefe. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I have some grave concerns about the deletion of those conditions. As outlined in the report, we notified this development in accordance with our community participation plan. We sought the opinions of people that were potentially going to be impacted by the development, so joining owners, people in the vicinity of the development. They raised valid concerns. I believe that those concerns can be mitigated with the imposition of conditions of consent, and that's why they're in the draft schedule of conditions for consideration. So, you know, I understand that often the New South Wales planning system doesn't allow for every possible eventuality, but this application has been assessed in accordance with New South Wales legislation, our own LEP, which is endorsed by this council and this community, and the same for our LEP, DCP, which has also been endorsed by this council and the community.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. I will go to the seconder of the motion and then I'll come back for any further questions or clarifications. Councillor O'Keefe, seconder of the motion. Councillor, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, this development proposal, it revolves around what I call a very, very soft usage. We're going to see maybe the maximum, and let's hope we do get the maximum of 35 vehicles here. But I think, as the presenter said, it's more likely to be 3 to 10 vehicles there. The ground is very, very unlikely to be disturbed it will remain pretty much as a park as it is. I'm very much in favour of a development which will actually bring an influx to our economy. And I can see this as actually bringing money into our economy. I think we've got to be a little bit forward thinking. I think we've got to step outside the square a little bit and take some risk and take on board what Mr. Johns has said. Nevertheless, I for one am inclined to wish to support the modifications to the conditions. Therefore, I'm in favour of supporting the modifications as outlined by Councillor Hasler. Thank you.
Well, our call for elected members would like to ask a question or speak against the motion before I went to Councillor O'Keefe.
Just a question.
Thank you, Councillor.
Looking at previous slides, and Councillor Hasler's raised this about the trees and that, those neighbours have no protection or guideline, have they? No trees there. Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thanks, Councillor. Paula, the question, the applicant is proposing to screen just the residential properties, but not the whole site. So is that, are they the trees you're referring to? You're referring to the trees on the primitive camping ground, which is the other facility in town, which is in the camping ground?
No. And the other question, so we would not have any, I'm not saying against the talking, I'm talking against the dark, but there will be no gravel or any of the others. No gravel put down.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe their intention is to put some gravel down, but not a dust-free surface, which is our, I guess, our concern in the position of that condition to protect adjoining owners from, potentially very large vehicles generating dust in dry times. The other reason for the imposition of that condition was that obviously quite heavy soil down there, and our concern that, vehicles get involved. As it, you're all locals, you understand that it's easy to get involved in heavy soil for small amount of rain, so it's really about trying to protect them as well as adjoining owners.
Councillor Hasler, would you like to write in?
I do.
Well, councillors, I've had 2 for, 2 against.
Mr. Mayor, I have further questions on this matter, and other councillors have been allowed to ask more than one question. I appreciate to be afforded the same courtesy.
So I'll just ask your fellow elected members if they're happy for you to ask a further question. Are we all? Councillor O'Keefe, would you like to ask a further question?
Well, thank you. I might even ask more than one if I can continue the indulgence. I thank Councillor Hasler before I ask my question in putting the photos of the wonderful campground attached to the showground, which I've just discovered is currently a resident of. And because we're not in committee of whole, to try and put it succinctly, I'll ask the director, if that ground was assessed as it currently stands against the conditions that were originally proposed in your recommendation, how would it fare?
Thanks for the question. So essentially we're talking about apples and bananas here. We're talking about a primitive camping ground, which is what one of the showgrounds has been approved as, whereas what the applicant is seeking here is a camping ground, 2 different things. Hence the imposition of the conditions that we've got on. I'm not au fait with how that regulation has changed since '95. My understanding is that primitive camping ground was approved in 2012. I'm not even completely sure whether it encompasses the entire area of the photographs that Councillor Hasler provided, or whether it's a very defined part of that where the concrete pads are. I'm not saying that is the case, but I'm not 100% sure of that, given that I had no notice that that was going to be used as an example. But I guess my point is that the apples and bananas, they're 2 different things.
Councillor Hasler, would you like to write a reply?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask a question beforehand. Mr. Johns referred to submissions. And can we have the number of submissions and the number that were opposed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe off the top of my head, maybe 4 submissions. I'm just looking at Mr. Hudson here. There were no objections per se, but there were 4 submissions. There were no objections per se, but on the condition that council imposed conditions to alleviate or ameliorate their concerns in relation to dust and privacy and that type of thing.
Before you write a reply, councillor Hasler, anything goes, it's December council meeting, obviously. Are there any other questions of councillors before we finish up with the right of reply and the motion? Are we all content to go to opportunity? Councillor Beck, do you look like you want to say something?
Oh, well, in the interests of speaking, not asking a question now, I might speak against the motion, if I may, Mr. Mayor. I'll speak against, I'll make it very clear for the benefit of my fellow elected members that I'm speaking against in the interest to have a chat. And the point I'm doing so is to indicate that I'm not opposed to the development, but I'm stating some concerns that we may be walking away from all of the conditions that Councillor Hasler has proposed to delete. There's a couple in particular that I don't actually think are terribly onerous or necessarily will cost the organisation, the proponent, much money and would result in them not proceeding with the development. I'm specifically concerned about submitting a detailed landscaping plan. I suggest that's possibly asking them to submit what their intentions are in order to try and screen the near neighbours, which I believe is my understanding that is actually the intention of the proponent, is to provide screening to affect the amenity of near neighbours, and find it interesting that we seek to delete that as a condition to provide a plan to do so, which I don't think would cost much money, and it's already intended by the proponent. I also think the comparison that Councillor Hasler's drawn with the primitive camping ground that already exists in town is a very good one, because the photographs put our current primitive camping ground in very good stead compared with some of the other developments the CM of the proponent. I don't mean that. I'll say that to draw an issue with the proponent, and I'm quite supportive of it. It's just I would suggest that reading through the conditions the proponent is considering too onerous, i.e. provide some dust-free surfaces or paved roads, and when you look at what looks like a compacted surface road in the current primitive campground, it doesn't look that difficult or that onerous. Ultimately, I'm speaking to suggest that I think there may be some miscommunication or misalignment about the intent of the organisation to safeguard the best interests of our community and to make sure we have a lasting asset to our community, and the proponent feeling that there's something else going on here. Having said all of that, I'm actually supportive of the development going ahead. I just maybe wish to put on record some of my concerns.
Councillor Hasler, would you like to reply now before I put the motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll just make the following comments. I'm certainly support what Councillor Hook said. This is very easily able to maintain these areas as a park-like state with lawn and grass. The issue of getting bogged, that they'll close the park if it's too wet. I mean, these are sensible operations. They don't need to make it more difficult for themselves. I mean, that's the whole point of it, that they're servicing their membership, although others can stay if they pay a higher price. So it's there. And if I use the example of Temora has 3 present camping sites or areas for these types of things. The showground, a council-owned caravan park. They allow free parking at the railway, heritage listed railway station, which has toilet showers. And they've now added one of these parks without the conditions being suggested here. I mean, that's a council that's proactive. That's a council that sees the market and understands the market. They control all 4 of the facilities, and they're happy to have the variety to try and maximise the market that they get coming through the morning. So you know, I urge people, I know, as I said, 2 of the conditions I probably will let you, I just don't think they're necessary. The rest will stop the process of the project going ahead, and I think that will be to the detriment of our community. So I encourage you all to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Hasler. Now, councillors, by show of hands, Those who are in favour of the motions before you? And against? Declare the motion carried. We'll now move forward on to item number 11.8, which is planning proposal to amend the Gunnedah Local Environmental Plan 2012. I'll hand back to Mr. Johns now to detail the recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, through you. While we're on the topic of RV parks in Randolph Street, councillors, this report, I guess, is an example of council being proactive and providing support to an organisation who wishes to make an amendment to the local environmental plan to allow an additional permitted use in an RV park that's now been approved by council. And essentially what that means is that in order to comply with the complex New South Wales planning system to allow not only RVs but also caravans, this amendment would allow that to happen on the RV park.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. I now call for elected amendment. Thank you, Councillor Fuller has moved the recommendation. Now becomes the motion if it's seconded. Do I have a second? Thank you, Councillor Hasler. Councillor Fuller, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Hasler, second the motion. Wish to speak?
No, Mr. Chair.
That'll be the case then, councillors. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? The motion carried. Moving on to item 11.9, which is the Koala Managed Plan of Management Development Application 2020/008. I'll hand back to Mr. Johns to detail the recommendation for you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, through you. This report seeks endorsement of the proposed Koala Plan of Management for the property known as 20 Sunnyside Farm Drive in Gunnedah, which is to the south of the main township. The Koala Plan of Management outlines the impacts of the proposed development and a series of mitigating measures associated with each potential impact. This requires endorsement by council and also the department. This is obviously not the determination of the DA itself.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. Now call for a member of the motion.
I'm happy to move that way.
Do I have a seconder to the motion? Thank you, Councillor Moses. Councillor Hasler, do you wish to speak?
It's a very detailed plan and I believe it's appropriate for the rest of our policy.
Do I have an elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion? Councillor Moses, as a seconder, do you wish to speak?
No.
To be the case, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? So the motion carried. Moving right along to item 11.10, and Mr. Johns has a declaration of interest in relation to this item. So I now like to invite Mr. Hudson to come forward to detail the recommendation that is before us in this item, which is in three parts, and it relates to the alcohol prohibited area, request for temporary suspension of Kitchener Park.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. This report seeks approval to suspend the alcohol prohibited zone at Kitchener Park on certain nights to allow alcohol to be sold during Gunnedah Premier League cricket tournaments.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. I now have elected, thank you, Councillor Hook has moved that recommendation to become a motion. Do we have a second? Thank you, Councillor Hook. Councillor, would you like to speak to the motion, Mr. Moody?
I just think it's a sensible recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And, I certainly recommend that fellow councillors approve.
I'd now like to call an elected member if you have a question or you'd like to speak against the motion to now speak. Councillor Luke is a second in the motion. Wish to speak?
It'll be nice to get some social activity back into this community, so it would be a good thing to for us to support.
Thank you, Councillor Luke. If there's no speakers against the motion, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? The motion carried. Thank you, Mr. Hudson. I'd now like to call Mr. Johns to re-enter the chambers. Mr. Hartley, can you please let the record show that Mr. Johns has re-entered the chambers. Councillors will now move on to the next item, which is 11.11, Gunnedah Shire Local Housing Strategy. And I'll hand back to Mr. Johns to detail that recommendation to councillors.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you, councillors, as you would have read in this report, simply seeks the allocation of $73,108.80 towards the development of the Gunnedah Shire Local Housing Strategy. You would recall that you all resolved back in June to develop this plan, and all we're doing here is, seeking allocation of funds We have gone to market. We've had a number of proposals for the work. We have a consultant in mind. I guess we just need the allocation of funds to move forward with that.
Thank you, Mr. Johns, and that's moved by councillor, it is moved by councillor Fuller and seconded by councillor Moses. Councillor Fuller, you wish to speak to the motion?
I need just congratulations on that, Mr. Johns, and I think it's a great idea.
I would like to member by to ask a question or speak against the motion. Councillor Moses has seconded the motion, wish to speak. There would be a case now for the motion, all in favour? Against? Declare that motion carried. Councillors, I have a declaration of interest in relation to item 11.12, which is next on the agenda. I'll be leaving the chambers for the discussion of vote determination. The Deputy Mayor, Councillor will now take the chair.
Record shows that the Mayor has left chambers. Before us we have item 11.12, Business Partner Program Round 2, 2020-21. And I hand over to Mr. Johns to outline the recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Through you, councillors, this report seeks endorsement of the recommendation of the Business Partner Advisory Group in relation to the Business Partner Program Round 2 for 2020-21. As you would have read in your reports, the recommendation seeks the allocation of $127,550 to 12 local businesses and organisations.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. It has been moved by Councillor Luke and seconded by Councillor Fuller. Councillor Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Once again, as I would like to thank the members of the business community and staff and the councillors who actually are on this working group with me. They're very hard decisions. It takes a lot of reading and research by the members of that committee. So I would commend to my fellow councillors the decisions of that working group, which was well researched and thought hard about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Luke. Do I have Councillor wishing to ask a question? Or
Just one.
Councillor Hazard.
Yes, I'm happy to support the recommendation, but it just seems to me that the two businesses got a significant amount of the funding. Is there a particular reason for that? Because they're a big operation and we're going about a big project, because it did limit the amount to some of the other projects and probably limit the number who could get some of the funds.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, sorry, Councillor Hasler, they received that amount of money because that's what they applied for, and the advisory group, they received that amount of money, a larger amount of money, I should say. There was no limit on the amount of money that could have been allocated to these projects, and I guess they've, according to the advisory group, they put a pretty good case for it. All the applications that received money were compliant with the guidelines, and the advisory groups made a recommendation based on the available funds and also the amount asked by each of those organisations.
Councillor Luke.
May I make a further comment with regards to that question?
I would certainly like him to do so.
Thank you. I think Councillor has said in his question that it probably reduced the amount available to other applicants. Now, there were still further funds available in that business partner program, so I would think that the members of that committee did not feel that they, even though they did, or that working group did allocate some or recommend some large amounts, that in no way curtailed any of the, or consideration of any of the other applicants.
Thank you, Councillor Luke. Councillor Fuller, do you wish to make comment?
I just want to support Councillor Luke on that. I think those two big applications are two massive big jobs in Canada that will create a lot more employment. So I think, that's the reason. And it was a hard decision for all. And congratulations to all the staff who had previously worked to help and get things organised. So
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Before I put the motion, I'd just like to add that I was also on that committee, and it was an extremely hard decision that was made. There is substantial funds left over for the next round, and those two large
applications that received a lot of money. The benefit there was major employment to the town. We thought it was really, really worthwhile for them. A very, very good case was put by both of them, and after much consideration from the entire committee, it was unanimously agreed that we should fund them to a large amount. Having said that, I shall now put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Yes, the motion is carried unanimously. Can we call the Mayor back into the chambers? Ms. Murphy, can you note that the Mayor is returning to chambers? Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. We'll now move on to item 11.13, Skills and Training Working Group, and I'll hand back to Mr. Johnson to tell that recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. For you, this report seeks the addition of 4 representatives to the Skills and Training Working Group. I believe the recommendation is self-explanatory.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Therefore, elect Councillor Moses has moved that recommendation from a motion and seconded by. Do I have a second of the motion, please, councillor? Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Moses, do you wish to speak to the motion as clear?
No, thanks, Mayor. Explain yourself.
Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Campbell is the second of the motion. Wish to speak.
Just a question here, please, Mr. Mayor. I noticed Canada High School on there was Junior and St Mary's approached, or they're not interested?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Campbell. Previously, I understand that there was an advertisement placed. There was an advertisement placed here. So essentially, it was Canada High School that made application. In saying that, if it wouldn't be my decision, but if the working group saw fit to add other schools and saw benefit, we could start bringing another report back to council.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I have an elected member who'd like to ask a further question before I put the motion. In case of the motion, all in favour? Against? Declare the motion carried. Moving on. Next is item 11.14, which is planning proposal to amend the Canada LEP 2012. I'll hand back to Mr. Johnson to detail that recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you, this report seeks final endorsement of this council, the rezoning 19 Adams Street from R3 medium density, which is its current zone, to B4 mixed use zone. The proposal has been publicly exhibited as the behest of the council, and there were no submissions forthcoming.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. Now, for elected member, thank you, Councillor Fuller, and seconded by Councillor Luke. Councillor Fuller used to speak as the member. I have elected member who'd like to speak against the motion, ask a question. Councillor Luke is the second of the motion, used to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Speak the case, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declare that the motion carried. Thank you, Mr. Johns, for your contribution to our December ordinary meeting of council. We'll now move on to item 12, which is Director of Infrastructure Services reports. I'll call Mr. Bartlett to detail his recommendations, starting with 4.1. Highest rating is thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, the purpose of this report is to transfer $10,000 from the roads restricted asset to fund the acquisition costs for a section of Matthias Road. These costs include fees payable to the General Office and to Crown Lands as compensation for land that was previously deserted as a travelling stock route.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. I'd like to remember who'd like to thank you. Councillor Hook has moved that recommendation that now becomes the motion. We'll give a second. Thank you, Councillor Moses. Councillor Hook, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Only to say that it's been a long road to hoe for such a short road. It's been a long time coming, and congratulations getting up to this point.
Do I have an elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion? Councillor Moses is a secretary who wishes to speak to the motion.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That being the case, I'll put the motion on favour. Against? Declare that motion carried. And that was Mr. Bartlett's one and only report. 2 over, and we might come back to him during class. I'll now move on to item 13, which is the Chief Financial Officer's reports. Mr. Connery is not with us, so I'll hand over to our General Manager, Mr. Brock, to detail the recommendations starting at item 13.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, this item is to present Council with the financial statements for 30th of June, year ended 30th of June 2020, and the Council's auditor's report for the year and ask that they be accepted. I do note that they were presented to the audit committee this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Groff. I now call for a recommended to move the recommendation become a motion. Thank you, Councillor Campbell, and seconded by Councillor Campbell. Do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I would like to member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question. Councillor Fuller is the second of the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Being the case, I put the motion all in favour. Against? Declare that motion carried. I'll hand back to Mr. Groff for detail 13.2 investments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation is that the principal investment of $68.7 million for all funds today be received and voted.
Thank you, Mr. Groff. Now call on elected member to move that recommendation. It is now the motion. Councillor Luke moving that motion. Do I get a second? Thank you, Councillor Moses. Councillor Luke, do you wish to speak to the motion as the member?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Do I have elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Moses is the secretary of the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Being the case, I put the motion all in favour. Against? Declare the motion carried. Thank you, Mr. Groff, for stepping in. Now moving on to item number 14, which is reports to committee. We have one, item 14.1, which is Planning, Environment and Development Committee meeting that was held on the 2nd of December. I now call for an elected member, Councillor Fuller has moved that motion and seconded by Councillor Luke. And I'll put that motion now. All in favour? Against? That motion carried. Moving on to item 15 is delegates report. We have 15.1 Murray Darling Association board meeting on the 19th of October. And I'll hand over to Councillor Campbell if you'd like to make any comments in relation to this report. So otherwise, if it be noted, and you want me to move it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's just got the wrong date on it. It's actually for the council for November 2020. And I think it's on there. 9th of October. Oh, it would have been the board meeting, yeah, no, fine, that's fine. Yeah, I'll move that one.
I have a second on the motion.
I'm happy to second, Mr. Chairman, and other interest in reading it to Councillor Campbell that Emma Bradbury is going, as indicated, staying down all of September next year. I attended, I think, the first meeting when she was promoted as the executive officer of the type list.
Councillor Campbell, would you like to speak to the report?
Yeah, that is true. Ms. Bradbury is finishing up at the national conference next year, which may be in May. So I think leadership succession will be happening first thing after New Year.
I'll now ask the members if there are any questions of the report of Councillor Campbell before I put the motion. No questions, I put the motion. All in favour? Against? Motion carried. Item 16 is for notice of motion. Questions on notice? We do not have any. So the next item is matters of closed meeting. So I'll call for an elected member to please move the motion that we move into closed meeting to discuss those reports of confidential nature. Councillor Haslett, do you want to do that?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I guess there's no that one of those items relates to pension still. I think they need to share a declaration of interest or something related to that. I'm sorry. Running the fact member of the government of the main bed group, the non-community.
I'll now call for an elected member to move the motion that we be closed the meeting to discuss those items of confidential nature. The members' council has moved and seconded by Councillor Moses. Now the motion on the favour. Against? The motion carried. Now call on all of those in the chamber. So we have two declarations of interest, one from Councillor Hasler, one from Councillor Keith. Ms. Martin, if you please let the record show that both have